Jen, do you remember making ice caves as a kid?
I do. That was always my favorite. And then didn't we have like a thing in elementary school where we weren't allowed to do that?
Yeah, because I remember we started building ice caves and hiding all our food in it. So like we would have rations for the winter was the logic. But then they banned us, but we kept doing it anyways.
And we were like, we don't care.
You can't keep us from the cave.
This is our life.
This is how we live. This is our people here. Much like us, there are some people you can't keep out of caves. However, it's a little bit different when adults decide to do caving. The descent into caving is what I would equivalent to one of the final frontiers. You're in a place that is totally light deprived, it's stagnant, and you never really know what's around the next corner. On November 20th, 2021, Beatriz Flamini, first time saying her name, a 48-year-old Spanish extreme athlete and mountaineer, voluntarily entered a limestone cavity in the mountains of Granada, Spain, with the intent to remain for 500 days inside the cave. She called this project Time Cave, and it was not merely her attempt to break a record, but also a science experiment on how the mind and body deals with such total isolation and sensory deprivation in a free-running environment. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Fire podcast. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything that we say in our podcast is hopefully true as we get it from reliable sources like other documents. I got a lot of this from case studies and different kinds of articles that were published on this. But of course, if we say anything wrong, you're more than welcome to start a conversation in the comments. We always love to hear what you hear on our cases. Today, we're not really talking about any heavy topics, so you can sit back, relax, enjoy yourself, and listen to the tale about caving. Unless you're like claustrophobic, like I am, where this is immensely terrifying. The idea of someone voluntarily squeezing through a tight gap where they're like have to like practically break their shoulder to get through, and they're just alone in the dark.
Me too. I just can't imagine doing that.
Voluntarily. And you never know what's in the cave with you. So the Time Cave expedition was rooted in Flamini's long-standing ideals of self-sufficiency. She had a career as a mountaineer and a rescue worker in the Serena de Gyarados? I don't speak Spanish that well, guys. So that's a Pokemon I just said, but I tried. Flamini spent decades training her body to survive in high altitude environments where physical resources would be scarce, and that she needed to have the mental fortitude in order to survive by herself. In 2019, while prepping for a solo trek along the Mongolian desert, Flamini recognized that she was physically prepared for the exertion, while she lacked the mental conditioning required for the long social isolation. To bridge this gap, she sought to replicate the extreme conditions of the desert in a more controlled but still hazardous environment. Her primary goal was to exceed the record of 463 days spent in a cave set by, holy crap, I don't know how to pronounce this name,
Milutin Velkovic.
Yeah, thank you. However, Flamini intended her research to be more psychologically rigorous than this guy who went into the cave. She wanted total disconnection from human interaction, including any news of global events or family developments. She didn't want to have any knowledge of what was going on. She instructed her support team to withhold all information, including the potential death of a loved one, in order to maintain the experiment. The selection of the cave was critical to the scientific design. The cavity, located north of Mortel in, Andalusia, was situated 70 to 80 meters, or if you're not in American freedom units, that's 230 to 260 feet below the surface. This step ensured that there would be a complete lack of light, and it was a very humid temperature profile as well. The cave's main chamber spanned 3,000 square feet with ceilings that reached heights of 12 meters, providing enough vertical space for exercise while maintaining this atmosphere. Geologically, the cave dates back to approximately 180 million years ago. A limestone structure formed through the slow erosion of time. For a human, this environment was a little stinky, kind of. It was very humid in there, and the rocks would occasionally drip, but it was overall very quiet in there. She was allowed a LED headlamp, and the logistics of sustaining life involved her getting 1,000 liters of water over the course of her 500-day stay. She had approximately 1.5 tons of equipment. This is food or just things to survive. To keep her not from getting bored, she had 60 books. She had a communication method, which was only one way, however. She had a computer where she could send any updates to the team. And you're probably thinking, okay, that's great. She got food, she got water, she got books, she's smart. But where is she going to use the washroom? And that would actually be removed by her team every 5 days to make sure that there would be no hazard to her through the buildup of any gases down there. But like I said, the most prolific experiment, or the most prolific part of this experiment, was the psychological impact of the Time Cave project, as it completely obliterated her sense of time. In the absence of seeing the sun, her internal clock got totally ruined, as naturally, whenever we take the sun away and live in total isolation, our circadian rhythm gets fluctuated. And we might think that we're on a 24-hour clock, but oftentimes the brain will add another hour. At the end of her 65th day of isolation, she had lost all meaningful perception of time. Eventually, she ceased to count the days entirely. This loss of orientation created essentially a lack of memory landmarks. She had nothing to look forward to. There was no calendar, no work schedules, no appointments that she needed to do, no news events. In the cave, every day was identical, and the brain was really struggling to form memories in order to trigger a timeline. When her support team eventually descended to retrieve her on April 14th, 2023, Flamini was in a state of dozing and seemed genuinely surprised that her time was up. Based on her internal estimation, she believed that she had only been underground for around 160 to 170 days. That is a huge discrepancy between her actual 500-day duration. The phenomenon is called chronostasis, or temporal compression, which is that the brain perceives months as single fluid now moments. Flamini described this as a perpetual state of, it's 4 a.m, I think. The psychological impact of 500 days of solitude. Flamini was able to employ a rigid self-imposed routine. She engaged in recreational exercise, knitting wool hats, painting, and drawing. She also chronicled her experience using the 2 GoPro cameras that she had with her. Though, notably, she requested that the screens would be removed so she couldn't see her own reflection. This lack of self-perception was a deliberate attempt to eliminate even talking to herself and viewing herself as a social construct which she could talk to. And the silence of the cave was absolute. Flamini's brain began to compensate for the lack of sensory input, and she reported having auditory hallucinations, which is a common phenomenon which you'll have during sensory deprivation. But having this over such a long period of time, she reported hearing someone call her name and hearing phantom sounds in the stillness. And so, imagine you're in this big ass cave and all of a sudden you're hearing your name. You're hearing something walking, something scuttling. Terrifying. As the experiment progressed, researchers noticed signs of cognitive fatigue, and when they looked back at her video diaries, one notable incident which provided insight into her mental state involved a knot in a rope used for one of the food drops. Flamini became intensely angry, including a 10-minute argument of where she accused her support team of changing the knot and compromising her safety. Later, she realized that she herself had changed the knot and completely forgotten it. So she was forgetting what she was doing as time went on. Her hygiene and health also was a part of the challenge, as she lived on an extremely limited diet, primarily consisting of lentils, and she consumed approximately 220 gallons of water over the stay of her in the cave. Hygiene was maintained under extreme constraints. She reportedly washed her body, her hair, and her teeth using only 1 liter of water per session. One of the most grueling moments of her stay in the cave occurred when a plague of flies suddenly invaded the cave. Due to the humidity in this cave, insects covered her body and her gear, presenting a challenge that really had to test her to stay in the experiment. It wasn't very sterile, the whole experiment, and, even though they would clean up the human waste, the flies would still smell it. So that was really hard on her. After 300 days in the cave, Flamini encountered a technical issue with her communication equipment. She began experiencing discomfort due to this, as she described feeling sonic waves that she couldn't really hear, or frequency from the router in her brain, resulting in headaches and nosebleeds, forcing her to move her sleeping tent to the exit of the cave for 8 days until the equipment was repaired. Despite this move to the cave mouth, Flamini still maintained her isolation. She remained in a tent and refused to speak or look at anyone who was there, and maintained her vow of silence. While these 8 days at the exit technically disqualified her from beating the record under some protocols, still she maintained the scientific reasoning or scientific experiment that she was trying to enact. While Flamini's project was a controlled experiment, the environment from Grenada prevented inherent dangers, such as these caves are pretty high risk due to just how remote they are and how unpredictable the geology can be. A fall on slippery limestone or an unexpected pit that occurred in the cave was all possible. A minor injury, like a broken leg, can become life-threatening when you're trapped inside a cave. Furthermore, there's still the risk of falling objects. It could be dislodged by a caver or erosion, but all of these proved as a crushing hazard. The environment inside the cave can also still be hazardous due to the accumulation of toxic gases such as radon or CO2. They can also be exposed to something called histoplasmosis, which is a fungal infection caused by bat poo. It's called bat mono, but it's bat poo, which in this case is it's really not good. And there's also the threat of hypothermia, because you're dealing with high humidity, and then all of a sudden it'll get super duper cold and you're trapped in this wet environment. Flamini emerged from the cave on April 14th, 2003. She was wearing her dark glasses to protect her eyes from the sudden onslaught of sun after 17 months of darkness. The immediate physical effects of her isolation were apparent. She suffered profound loss of balance, requiring the support of people to help her walk as she adjusted to actually having a horizon and the complexity of walking on the surface world. The transition back to society was not marked by immediate joy, but by a complex sense of grief. Flamini reported that she didn't want to leave the cave and felt a deep sense of loss for the peace and simplicity of her life that she had built. This post-isolation syndrome is characterized by a sensory overload and feeling a disconnection from the social world. She didn't have any news for that long, and she didn't have any connection to her friends for that long. She missed out on a whole bunch, and now she's just expected to go back to living normal. In the follow-ups on Flamini's condition, her biological clock had drifted substantially. Her menstrual cycle had been disrupted, while She initially expressed a desire to continue the experiment for another 500 days. Scientists advised that if she stayed, she would have irreversible mental and physical damage from this. The Time Cave project was a rare look into the long-term maintenance of a disruption of the circadian rhythm and total isolation. It's something that might help scientists as far as when they look at spaceflight or the colonization of Mars, what might happen. Flamini's 500-day stay represents a landmark of achievement as far as what the human body can go through, what the human spirit is capable of, despite having complications and the possible interference within the study. Still, her journey gives a profound map into what the human mind is truly capable of, and that it's possible to adapt and ultimately kind of fall in love with the idea of the void. The dangers of the cave environment and the psychological price of silence serves as reminders of the limits that we can handle as humans. As Flamini continues to heal and reintegrate into society, her data will remain a cornerstone for research into the frontier for, hopefully, all of time. And that's where we're at with today's case. Let us know your thoughts down below. Would you ever go caving? Personally, for me, I don't think I ever would. I can really respect people who are like going into caves and exploring. I remember one time I had booked a session to go into a cave and watch the movie The Descent, which is essentially just a movie where people go into a cave, they get trapped, and then there's monsters in there. And I'm like, yeah, perfect. Let's go down there and watch that. But there's a whole bunch of other crazy shit that people do in caves, like caving underwater.
Those scare me. Two of my biggest fears is like being trapped and underwater.
Because like at least above, I can breathe. But when you're under, you're just like, well, this is it. But yeah, let us know what you think, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.